So welcome everyone. I'm excited. I'm hoping that the session ignites some really interesting conversation. This topic is, I know, really important to some, and perhaps to others you haven't had much need to ponder the dynamics of group work, but I think throughout any facilitator's life you do come into contact with various group dynamics, and so this topic really is very applicable to all of us in this field. Oh, I do hear someone. You're going to make sure that you're muted, please. Thank you. All right. In my usual fashion, if you've taken a webinar with me before, because there's quite a few of us and time is prohibitive, I did ask, sent an email out this afternoon just asking if you could share a little bit about your background with group work on a Padlet. If you haven't had a chance to do that, that's fine. I do urge you to go ahead, post something of your own, as well as read what your peers have shared. There's some really interesting suggestions in there, and that is just a really nice place for us to share a little bit of our own personal stories, and we'll have a lot of chance and opportunities in this webinar to continue with those discussions. The agenda is short and will go by very fast. These hours speed by. It's going to be designed very much in the almost the sequential way that a group happens. So the forming, the norming, then communication, milestones, grading, and then we'll finish up with options for when things go wrong. So there's going to be quite packed. I am going to ask that we focus on two areas for communication. The one is the chat. The chat is open at any time, and think of it as like we all can talk over one another. So enjoy the chat, because even if one of us is chatting, talking verbally, another person can be adding their thoughts and ideas. If you would like to share verbally, which I highly encourage, please just put up your hand, which is the little icon underneath participants. And the reason I ask that is just so that we can try and manage a little bit the overlapping of audio, and then you can unmute yourself when I call on you, and we'll mute you afterwards. All right, so I'm going to try and keep an eye on hands, chat, and the slides, and talk at the same time. So this is going to be a show. All right. So to get us started, I always like to figure out, what is the problem we're trying to solve? Why are we doing this? Are groups important? If they're not important, then we shouldn't be doing them. And if they are important, we should be doing them, and we should be doing them well. So whether you prefer to use the chat, or you would like to raise your hand, I would love for you to share why you think groups are important. All right, Teresa, would you like to speak?
Sure. I feel groups are important in terms of getting along well with others. When we do online courses, we don't have the interaction that we do in the classroom, where you can see that people are getting along, and you can organize it a lot easier than you can online.
Mm-hmm.
I feel groups are important in the field I teach in, as in emergency communications. If you end up getting a job in emergency communications, you're with those people more than you're with your family. So it's important that you're able to get along and respect other people. Whether you like them or not is irrelevant. You have to work, you have to be able to respect what they do, and you have to be able to work with them. And that's why I feel group work is important in some instances.
All right. And your comment about whether you like them or not, that's really profound. That's true, isn't it?
Well, you don't always like everybody you work with. I mean, you can't possibly, because, there's always somebody there that you don't really care for too much. However, you still have to work with them. And sometimes you're thrown together to do projects or whatever. And again, in emergency communications, it's slightly different. You all are working together towards a common goal. So for example, the tornado that tore through Nashville today, imagine their communications people, their 911, their police, fire, and ambulance people all had to work together to deal with that common incident. Well, there's still other incidents going on that still needs emergency services response. So the people had to work together. So you're backing each other up. And again, you don't have to like them to be able to do the job properly and to be able to back them up. And that's the whole purpose, I think, or that's one of the main features of this, I think.
Super. Thanks for sharing. Is there anyone else that would like to share with audio? We do have the chat going quite strong. I see flames. And Teresa, you can just lower your hand. Else I'll call on you again. No worries. All right. So I noticed that people, is there anyone, and maybe you wouldn't admit it if you felt that, but anyone that really doesn't feel group work is important? I'm welcome for that perspective. I have a sneaky feeling that especially as social educators, social people, educators, we like to work with people. We probably all see a big, great value in group work. And we've got a wide range of responses from the group. All right, so let's say, all right, group work's important. It's important for multiple reasons, and it's important for people to work together in order to get things done, or as Stephen says, to execute a plan. So based on that, let's figure out what are our next steps and what that means for us as educators. And so the first thing I want to ask you is, as you have just gone through a semester, you had a 30% group work project at the end, and it was pure bliss. It turned out beautifully. Share with the group, what does that mean to you? What would that look like? A wonderful, perfect, well-functioning group project. And again, you can raise your hand if you would like to share. And if you've got a personal story about something that's happened to you in your own experience, that would be super. Could even include you as the student or as a participant. I see Sheila saying when there's a common goal and they all move towards it. That's magic. No arguments. And they're all happy with the end result. Everyone's ideas and perspectives were included and the workload was equal. Anybody want to speak? Maybe share their own experience of a magic group? All right, I see that the comments are still coming in. Again, feel free to chat, to speak, sorry.
Can you hear me, Michelle?
I can. Is that Ruth?
Yes, it is. Sorry,
Ruth.
I just figured out how to get up there and speak.
No worries.
I apologize. I'm a newbie to this. I do think it's extraordinarily important, especially for, it doesn't matter what field you're in, you have to work with somebody. And in the early childhood education field, you not only have to deal with your co-workers, your superiors, and the children, but often parents who may not necessarily want to hear what you have to say or don't necessarily agree with what you have to say. So you have to make sure that you have the capabilities to diffuse concerns or arguments, not that I like the word arguments, but concerns or issues in a de-escalation manner, as opposed to fueling it and having a bonfire in front of the children, even worse.
Mm-hmm. Super, thank you for sharing. And I know Stephen put up his hand, so Stephen, if you'd like to share.
Yeah, I'd like to share my recent teamwork where I took a course at U of T, and it was online, and one participant was in Hamilton, one was in Ottawa, one was myself in Oshawa, and we broke down what we were going to do, our segments of it. We all hit the time line that we had set out. When we had disagreement in the group, we would come back online, the three of us, using Zoom, and talk about it, talk through the problems and sort it out. And there were 3 different phases to the project. And the first phase, we were quite happy. We got a 96. And then the next 2 phases, we got 100%. And it was because we were very fluid. We each said, this is my area of expertise, and they went for it.
And that's a super point. If students would only realize, and we as students realize that you exponentially improve the quality of your work when you work successfully in a team, right? It's a much better output in the end in doing it on your own. In magic scenarios like the one you're mentioning, Stephen, where everyone's committed. Lovely. All right. So we have a fairly good idea of what this magic group looks like and what we're aiming for. And I think most of us that have been in a group or worked with students in groups, we know that it doesn't always turn out as rosy. So the purpose moving forward is really for us to talk about our experiences, talk about some of our challenges, as well as to brainstorm some ideas. And I do have some resources for you as well that you can use and adapt and add to at any time that hopefully you'll find purposeful in your own facilitation. So the first issue I want to just have a look at is setting up the group. And I know from reading the Padlets that people have various experiences with setting the groups up. So some online courses, so if you teach in D2L or in Moodle or any LMS, usually there's a set of functionalities that you can manipulate. And when you inherit a course, you may inherit those settings. But rest assured, if you want to change the settings of your groups, you can reach out to us at PPL or the cafe, and we'll be able to help you to change those settings. So a lot of people inherit settings or set up settings that include things such as automatically when a student is populated into the course, they're moved into a group. So it's totally random and it's done by the computer and you never have to look at it. A second way is that the facilitator is manually going to put students in. So that means that until students have been manually allocated by the facilitator, they're sort of sitting in a holding area and then they need to be moved over manually. The third type is students self-select. So students decide who they want to be on their group and they can choose their peers and then the system allocates them into a numbered or labeled group of some kind. So the first thing I want to let you know is there are different ways that groups are set up automatically and that you can change those settings if the course you're facilitating right now has settings that you don't prefer. Reach out to PPL, reach out to me, and we can certainly help you out. Does anyone have any other ways that you know that groups are formed? Face-to-face as well. I mean, I know a lot of face-to-face courses have group work. How are there any different ways? I see Mike saying it works well if you can choose the group to work with. Okay. Anybody else? Seen any other ways that groups could be put together? Then groups choose, try and get life experience folks with younger students. Yes, I know sometimes people will look at experience or culture, or they want diversity. Let's put it that way. So they might look at the group and say, how can I create a diverse group? And they'll put students together that way. That's an excellent one. Peer sharing without bias or judgment environments. Get students to consider when they usually have time, when they're available. Very good point. That's from FCAP, who I don't know who that is, but a good suggestion. So the idea is perhaps students that can get together at nights or students that can get together on weekends or on Tuesdays and have them form their group that way. I've also seen groups formed by topic. Yes, Ruth, you're right. It's difficult if students don't live nearby, however, and we'll talk about that. So you could have, one thing I've done before is I've created a Google sign-up sheet on Google Drive, and I've chosen topics, and students would choose based on the topic that they're interested in. So they didn't necessarily. Oh, hi, Barb. It's Cap. Sorry, I'm squirrel when it comes to the chat because I'm trying to watch all these different things. But they sign up for topic and not based on who's going to be in the group. And then at least we know they've got some buy-in because it's a topic that they're passionate about. Anyone else seen different criteria for developing groups? And you're welcome to speak at any time. All right. Okay, so we've talked about group setup. If you are in face-to-face situations, a lot of people use just sign-up sheets. You can put a poster on the wall and divide it into groups A to F, and students run and write their name. I've seen that where they run over each other. I've also seen, and Teresa's put up her hand, sorry. Teresa, in a moment. I've also seen it being fairly civilized where it's digital online and students go in, or there's a pass around sheet. But I think when you do something like a pass around sheet, the students that get the tail end of that pass around feel a little bit anxious. Teresa, we would love to hear from you.
I teach through Ontario Learn, so I have students from all across the province, and what I do is try and group them according to the college that they're coming from, so that at least they're a little closer. But my students, I don't go through Moodle to do my groups. I just create the groups and then let them figure out how they're going to do it after that, because they probably are way better on the computer than I am.
Oh.
So.
And if you ever come up against any obstructions with that format of having them group themselves?
Well, they don't group themselves. I group them. So I tell them what group they are, and I tell them what, because they do case studies.
Okay.
So they have to look up legal stuff, and I give them their group, but I group them according to their kind of college that they go to.
Okay.
So not if that helps or not, because they kind of figure out how they want to talk to one another themselves.
Super. That's a great suggestion for those teaching in Ontario Learn. Stephen's sharing number off, and then all ones are in group 1, 2s are in group 2s. Yep, I swear that's been around since Socrates, that particular method. I've also seen people do things like put out, they have 4 colors, and students randomly take a color, and then that ends up being their group. There's lots of different ways, whether you're face-to-face. Online tends to be a little bit more limited, but it can still be, there's still a lot of options. So we've got a group set up. And the second issue is group cohesion. So now that we've got our group set up, sorry, I'm having a my apologies. So now we've got a group set up. How do we make that group cohesive? What do we do to ensure that that group has got, each member's got skin in the game, that they from the very beginning understand their responsibilities to one another? So I'd love to hear. Teresa, your hand's still up. Is that from previous? Okay, and Ruth P., you put up your hand visually. Would you like to say something?
Yes, sorry, I don't know where the hand is.
No worries. I can't see everyone's screen based on where I'm at, but I'm trying.
I was just going to say that, I've lost my train. Gosh, what was the question? I'm sorry.
We were talking about how can you get the group to be cohesive from the very beginning, yeah.
I think having clear expectations and clear guidelines of what not necessarily the format, but what the outcome needs to look like, so that everybody's on the same page. And I think doing check-ins to make sure that one isn't gone off on a tangent and somebody else is over here, but making sure that the team or the group members are very focused on what the actual, as Teresa called, the topic, because I think that's really key. Because then if it's not clear, then you find that the leaders may go off on another tangent and somebody else is kind of left behind, and then suddenly there's a breakdown. The cohesion doesn't exist. So they need to have clear guidelines, and I think check-ins are really important so that you can help guide or direct without really coming across as, say, a dictator, to use a terribly negative word, but just to kind of ask them questions about how they're feeling, how's it going, and making sure there's a nice follow-up through.
Super. Okay. No, that's great. Louise, I see you would like to say something.
Yeah. Hi. I liked Chad's idea of the upfront contract that was shared in the Padlet. I know that has worked for me in the past in face-to-face, because then it really does force them, if you sign your name to something, there's a little bit more reflection at the get-go. In the past, what I've also done is done a team evaluation. So they rate each other on certain criteria, and I make sure that that's right up front, that, you're going to be evaluating each other, and that'll be part of the experience as well as part of probably the mark, but I can't remember how that all went down. But I know that forced a lot of conversations when I was teaching face-to-face. I'm looking forward to seeing how this unfolds in an Ontario Learn online course. That mine doesn't start till April 1st, so I'm just filling up my cup before I have to go into
well, that's great.
teaching mode. Okay.
Super. Teresa, your hand's still up. Would you like to share on this one?
Yes, ma'am, I would.
Go ahead.
Well, I've been doing this for a long time, and what I did both in my face-to-face, when I was teaching face-to-face, and now that I'm teaching online, every group had to create a secretary, and usually it was somebody who either could type the best or had a good computer or was familiar with the programs or whatever. But each group has a secretary, and the secretary, that part of their final project, the final written document, or the final online document, had to include secretary's notes, and they got marked for that. So the secretary's notes included the people that were involved with the group, how they divided the work up, who was doing what task, how often they met. And the secretary's notes actually are quite comprehensive, and it also includes somebody who does not participate, which to me was critical, because it's not fair for 5 people in a group, 4 people to do the work and 1 person to tag along. And I've always disagreed with that function of group work. Having a secretary keep track of all that stuff and acknowledging the fact that maybe somebody wasn't participating as well as the other ones, because I'd see messages that said Sally was on the phone call and so-and-so was on the phone call and Jane was on the phone call. We didn't hear from Rob. And then the next one was like, we emailed back and forth, didn't get a message from Rob, kind of thing. So it was clear that Rob wasn't participating. He get a 0. Like, I never made any concessions to these students. You're either in or you're not. And the secretary's notes were so accurate because they didn't want to have somebody tag along either. And that was that's the key to my group work, is those secretary notes. And I read them diligently. And it does work.
I've never heard of a secretary. I've heard of other ways of people sort of keeping track of each other and reflecting on themselves, but that's a really interesting role. Thanks for sharing. And there's a lot of information in the chat, so I do want to confirm with you that I will be transcribing the chats into the slide notes area, and I'll be sharing that with you later this week, so we won't lose any of that. I've seen a lot of very good comments talking about the contracts, talking about, sorry, let me just go back up here a bit. Students divvying up their different skills and working together based on their strengths to get things done, as well as, let's see what here. No, okay, and Barbara's saying a mark for number of postings in the group discussion forum. So actually looking to see how active they've been in communicating with their group members. So there's quite a lot there, and again, I will transcribe this into the notes. Just a suggestion, and from my experience, is that sometimes when they're allowed to select a topic or work on a topic that's particularly of interest to them, they tend to be fairly engaged, and it automatically, in some sense, creates maybe it's a false group cohesion, but they feel like they've met like-minded people. And so if it's a topic that they say, hey, you like this, I like this too. I love kittens, you love kittens. That's obviously a simplistic example, but that's kind of sets up almost a false but initial sense of we belong together. We should be together in a group. And several people did mention that contract. So I am going to show you some examples of contracts that I am sharing with you that you're welcome to use. And they were made in particular times for particular groups in a particular type of course, but they give you a very good idea of a starting place where you potentially might want to adapt and use in your own courses moving forward, because that's a really useful resource. All right. Just checking the chats and everything. So the next one is communication. Does anyone have any stories you want to share, be it good or bad, about how groups communicate with one another? Feel free to put up your hand. I'm keeping an eye on that. So how can group members communicate with one another? Oh, Ruth, I see your hand. Go ahead.
Many years ago, I was working with the day students in the ECE program, and they were utilizing a lot of social media to get their points across. And it was a youthful group, and there was 3 of them in the group, 3 young ladies, and they actually had been in kindergarten and went right through school, right through into college together. By the end of this project, they were bitter enemies.
Oh no.
Oh, I was so sad. It was terrible. We actually had a sit down to kind of sort some things out, because their levels of, and I have to take some ownership in that, because it was one of the first classes I had taught. And so I was not terribly experienced with it either, and was kind of blown away when these best friends suddenly became best enemies. But sitting down and talking, and it was around, not taking ownership, and it became a cat scratch and name calling, and it was just awful. And ironically, they did extraordinarily well on the project, but the relationship was just totally torn in 5 different directions, even though there was only 3 of them, because other people became involved too. It was terrible, and it was very wrenching within the entire group of the class. There was over 30 students, so there was like it was like a volcano and lava flying all over. It was awful. Thankfully, I have not had any more of those.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. And to be honest with you, I'm a mother of a 14-year-old daughter who works really hard on projects, and she was in a group with her best friend. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure if they were best friends after that experience either. So I know exactly what you're talking about. It was not a good situation, and unfortunately, her teacher didn't really. My opinion, of course, I'm a mama bear. I didn't feel like it was managed very well, but I also know it's really difficult to manage group work. And so that's why we're here to learn from each other and learn tips and tricks to improve as we go along. I've seen in the chat that there's a lot of interesting suggestions. I want to circle back, and then Teresa, I will call on you. But we have people talking about WhatsApp, FaceTime, Facebook, social media. Let students decide. Yes, I think students need to have some flexibility in how they communicate, but I am going to put a caveat to that. And I did notice someone mentioned before that it's still a good idea to have them copy and paste that into a discussion forum. The reason I suggest that is because as a facilitator, you're disconnected from all that communication that's happening in those various channels. And if a student comes back, later in the project and says, so-and-so never communicated, never shared, never did anything, you've got nothing to check to see if that's true or not. And it's not always the 100% truth. So I do tell my students that they're welcome to communicate with one another in various ways, but they do have a discussion board for their group, and I expect them regularly to put updates there of what's happening and and who's involved and how things are going. And that way you can just catch it quicker if there's a student that's not communicating with their group. So that's just a little caveat to that one. But yes, there's a lot of different ways to communicate. And Teresa, I'd love to hear from you next.
I'm sorry, I forgot my point. I think.
Oh,
no, it's come back to me now. When you were talking about the students that didn't get along and caused problems for best friends and stuff, when I worked with my class live, I split up the groups that sat together, because traditionally when they come in for school, the friends would all sit together, right? Mm. I'd split them up. That was my first order of business, and it used to tick off a lot of students when I did that. But I did that for a reason, is because I didn't want them working with their best friend. I wanted them working with somebody they didn't know, because that's the whole purpose, is to get these people involved with other people and not the people they're comfortable with. And yeah, it could wreck relationships. I had one class where it kind of wrecked a boyfriend, girlfriend who were both taking the same course because of that. So I learned very early, and that was my first class that I ever taught too. It's funny what lessons you learn at the beginning. And that was one of them. I split everybody up. I was like, and so I do it now. And typically on the online group, because it's more spread out for me, they don't often know one another. And so it makes it a little easier in terms of doing that. But anyway, that's another little hint.
Thank you. Split them up. I just can't help adding, and then I'm going to call on Louise. I feel that maybe marriage counselors should give prospective people getting married some sort of a group work. And if they can survive that, then we know it's going to be good, right? Louise, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, hi, thanks. When you were talking about having the group members check in on the discussion forum, even if they're using WhatsApp or something else, I'm wondering, has anyone ever, or did you see the benefit of perhaps a template for something like that, where you're getting what you need, what you think is, what is an important thing for you to know about? Do you have a template for what that check-in might look like, or maybe people could just spout off what they think that should include? Because if I were to ask a group, I'm just thinking ahead, I might get inconsistent, and I think it'd be really great if it was consistent. Anybody have some experience with that? Or what the characteristics would be of what you'd like them to report in on?
I can share, but I'm going to see if anybody else would like to step in on this one. So Sheila says,
I mean, it's the obvious ones are like who's doing work, or what have you delivered, or if you've created milestones, are people hitting them, that kind of stuff. But I'm wondering about sort of the tacit stuff that can cause boyfriend and girlfriend to break up, or, I mean, we're not there to keep relationships together, because there's a lot more going on there if one little group work has broken you up forever. But is there some of maybe the tacit stuff that we could be using for them to check in on that would force reflection and actually teach them about some of the benefits of group work?
So I see people are talking about milestones. Ruth is saying that hers changes with each project, which I find as well. I find so in my experience, I've taught a lot of fine arts students, and I've dealt with them differently to how I've dealt with nursing students when I taught gen eds to nursing students. So sometimes it does need to be tailored, but Louise, I do have an example of some check-ins. They might not hit on those tacit bits that you're referring to, but I think there might be a good start for you to maybe you can do some adapting. And it does talk about things like, what have you completed? When have you promised your group it will be done, and have you delivered on that? So and I think it also depends on really, I like to always go back to the learning outcomes of a course. So I would imagine that in fields like ECE, social service worker, mental health worker, group work and communication and responsibility have a very different meaning in those situations than perhaps if you're in accounting or something else. Not to suggest that group work's not important for everybody, but I do think there are some nuances that one field might want to emphasize one thing a little bit more than another. I know reflection is really big in education, and we talk a lot about reflecting as being practitioners, but I've seen other fields where reflection is not really such a big issue. It's more about end results. Just did we meet the end results? So I think there are a bit of nuances there as well, but I for sure I will show you a template I have that you can play around with.
That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah. So I hope everyone's keeping an eye on the chats as well. There's a lot of really good sharing going on there. Anybody else want to? Alicia, I do know your hand was up for a few moments. I don't know if someone ended up saying what you wanted to say, or just don't want to miss you if you still have something you'd like to add.
Hi, Michelle.
Hi.
I don't know if I want to add anything, but I was just, I just wanted to, I wrote something on the Padlet today. This is my first group work that I'm having with this course, and I'm having a lot of problems with it where students are just waiting until the assignment is due to find. I asked them to pick their own groups. So they're waiting for when the assignment is due, and then they pick in their groups at the last minute, which is causing some problems. But what I'm hearing now is that I think from next term, I'm probably going to set up the groups myself. And as you said, I think the groups, you can set it up on the system as well, which I think I prefer as well. That will be way easier. And I think Louise was just talking about they rate each other, is what I did when I was in university. So I'm thinking that's something I want to do, because their assignment is to give me a video clip. It's a business communication course, and they're doing interviews. So I have to listen to the video clip, but I don't know if they're working well together or that clip is going to be perfect. So it's going to be difficult to say, how do you grade each one fairly based on only that clip, when they may have to force somebody to come to that, that group session. So I'm just listening to learn what I can do for my.
We've all learned through fire, Alicia. Don't worry.
Thanks,
Does anyone
Michelle.
have any suggestions? So Alicia has commented on maybe setting up the groups herself at the very beginning, but she did describe a situation where their final work is a video. How do you discern how much of an equitable workload that was for everyone in the group? Does anyone want to share something that they've done to resolve that issue? You can speak in the chat or raise your hand. I'm trying to keep an eye on any hands, so I don't see any hands. Alicia, I do have some templates that I think will help, where students actually have to rate their peers as well as themselves. Okay. And it's not foolproof like with anything, but I have found that if you have a group of at least 3 to 4 students, you're going to get a fairly good idea. If one was a bit of a not participator, the other 3 will pretty much all give you that same information. So it's fairly easy in a situation. I don't know if it works so much if it's a group of 2, because then it's maybe a bit more of a he said, she said. But certainly I would say 3 to 4 people, you pretty much know from that feedback who was involved and who slacked off. And I will share those with you.
Thank you.
Yeah. We do have some in keep the value of the group assignment low. So you can certainly do that. Keep in mind that we do have to follow the course outline. So if it does say the group assignments with 30%, then we do need to be mindful of that. But we can break that 30% down into some milestones, which we'll talk about in a moment. And in that way, you can manage the group with dangling some carrots in front of them. So I just wanted to just my little piece of advice about the discussion board, which I mentioned earlier for communication. And then move on to milestones. So I do have some documents to share, and to reiterate what I said before, if you have any documents, please feel free to add them. They will be in a Google Drive that I'll share with you. I would love, I've kind of been gathering them as I go along, as well as asking around for examples. And I think the more examples we have in different contexts, the greater we will be as a community to find appropriate documents that help us. But milestones are a really important way for anyone who's done project management or had to plan a wedding, or I don't know, get your kids through final exams in high school. I don't know. It's all just based on time and space and resources. So it really is important, and it's an important skill for students to learn, that they need to set milestones early on, and they need to be accountable for those milestones within the timelines that are given. And when it doesn't mean that your project, the group will necessarily be without any issues, but it's much easier for a student to identify when they've gone off track, as well as to identify when their peer has gone off track. So it's one thing for a student to complain about a peer and say, oh, he's not doing anything. Well, that may or may not be true, but it's a lot more useful when they can refer to the milestones and say, listen, he's missed this, we're supposed to have this done. He's missed this, we're supposed to have this done. And then that's a much easier communication discussion for the facilitator to have with that said student, to ask them about those milestones and challenge them on them. We've got some ideas. Mike is sharing that break the large project into manageable pieces. Super idea. You definitely don't want to leave 30% project marks right at the end where if something goes wrong, it's a 30% loss to a student. That really is devastating for them. We also have teammates mark rate their peers. Yes. So there's definitely going to be many different ways that we can try and get those milestones sorted out. And again, I'll show you some examples you can use. Does anyone want to share verbally their experience with milestones? Anyone tried milestones in some form or the other and it didn't work? Yes, Louise, go ahead.
Actually, I'm not answering the question. I just had a thought. Oh. To me, I'm all about making this relevant for when they're in the real world of work. And we're all governed by milestones in a work plan. In any project, at least we should be. Most adults are, depending on the role you're doing. So I'm a big fan of the milestones, and I loved that idea of breaking the project into smaller ones, maybe having them craft their own work plan and then the milestones and helping with that, because that's just a great skill to have in any project outside of work. So that could be something they could continue to transfer.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so anyone else? I see we've got Mike giving some great points. Yes, Mike, it's about teaching the method. You're right. I mean, we talked about at the very beginning, what's the purpose of group work? We didn't necessarily so much focus on the final product. I mean, their PowerPoint presentation. Is that really always the most that they can learn from that experience? And I would think often the answer is no. What they learn from the experience is those soft skills, which are very important to employers right now. It's, can they communicate? Can they be accountable? Can they deal with conflict in an appropriate way, and work together with others to get a common goal completed? So really, there's a lot of underlying skills there that, in some ways, when all is said and done, and they walk, they leave your class. those are the skills that really they can take with them into the workplace and transfer right into a new situation. And Mike yells out project management 101. Yes, Mike, I always wish I had taken project management because I feel like it would solve so many problems in my life. I would project manage my kids and my husband and my pets, but very much so the principles of project management very much come into play. All right, so anyone else with hands up? I'm keeping an eye on. No. All right. Okay. So the next point I want to look at is grading criteria, and we've already touched on that a little bit, but I'd love to hear your feedback on grading, because I know words like fair and slacker, and you know, there's a lot of things when students, their currency is grades. They're passionate about their grades, some more than others. And so I think it's very important that we're mindful of our grading criteria, and that we don't just slap that together, but think it through very well. So I'd like to know if people can share their ideas of their experiences, either as students or as facilitators and teachers in a classroom. What are different types of grading that you think would help encourage a healthy and fair group situation? Welcome to put up your hand. Add it in the chat. I've got rubrics. Yep, a lot of people are saying rubrics. And peer evaluation. All right, Sheila's saying she divides it up where there's maybe 60% is group mark and 40% is for individual contribution. All right. Rushes, they're harder on their own rubric than their facilitator would be. I have seen that in instances where a student gives himself he's 60 and the facilitator goes no, and their peers say no, that was an 80. So yeah, it's interesting how students can actually surprise us and be hard on themselves. All right, anyone want to share verbally any experiences they've had?
Yes.
All right, go ahead.
It's Trisha.
Hi.
One of the things that I've noticed is that they read the assignments and they really don't answer the assignment correctly. So I believe that there's something wrong with the way that the assignment has been worded, crafted, created. So I've actually had to read when everyone misses, you know, can you create a PR plan? And then they write a press release, but they were supposed to write a PR plan, and that's the chapter they read in the book. There's something wrong with the assignment, because when they're all doing it wrong or not appropriately based on what I'm reading, I feel it's necessary to be fair with them. So I will explain what I was looking for, but then I won't grade them negatively, because there's something in the clarity of the assignment, and I've noticed that a lot in the marketing program.
All right, very good point. So Trish, when you see those, please reach out to myself or your program manager. Yes, I think we've all created bad instructions and been the recipients of bad instructions, especially if you've ever tried to create something that you bought at IKEA. We all know how frustrating it is for students to get, you know, those IKEA instructions that simply don't make sense, and we certainly want to fix that. That's very key. So yes, thanks for bringing it up and for sharing, and making sure that we get onto fixing that. I do appreciate that you're giving them some leniency. If you notice that exactly, if you ever think of a multiple choice question and every single student gets that multiple choice question wrong, you got to start wondering if maybe that multiple choice question was worded incorrectly, right? Or that they weren't supported in some way with resources. But Beck, I'm going to call on you if you don't mind, and you can chat if you want. Oh, I think you already asked. Stephen asked the question, you're answering. I was going to ask, you mentioned interviewing the students, and you say you set up a time for each group in advance, then you ask each student about their task and role and how much they have learned. Excellent. So that is time intensive. I think in small classes, that's probably fairly easy to do. Maybe in larger classes, it might become very complicated. But I like that idea because I think there's a way to do that asynchronously as well. So while Babak, you're having that live time with the group, you can also have them fill out a form or even make videos where they answer some questions and share with you their contribution and reflection on the experience. So for certain, there's some different ways that we can translate that into asynchronous feedback. All right, anyone else want to comment on that? Now, something that Debbie, our dean, threw out there, and it's an interesting point, and I wanted to hear your ideas, is what happens if someone in the group plagiarizes? So she threw that at me, and I was caught off guard. It wasn't something that had been percolating in my head when I was planning out this session, but it's a pretty good question. What happens if someone plagiarizes in the group? So not the group plagiarizing, one of the group members. Babak saying it happened last term. Anyone like to speak up and tell us their thoughts or experiences with this?
I just want to add one more layer.
Sure.
And, not just if they plagiarize, but what if one of their group members picks up on it and asks that group member to revise their work and that group member refuses to?
Okay, this is getting better and better. Babak, you would love to share with us. We'd love to hear from you.
Sure. Last term, it happened to one of the groups, and the first thing that happened was the other two members of the group reported it to me. So they didn't want to be punished because of something that the other student did. So, but I asked for proof, and they sent me all the proof, what the person wrote and the sources he used and all the communication, and I reported it to the college. And that's all.
Okay. And sorry, did you mention what you did as far as the grades? Sorry, I didn't hear that last bit.
Sorry, which part?
Did you mention what you did as far as the grades for the group or the individuals in the group as a whole?
Well, it was before the grading time. It was in the middle of the project, and the two other students sent me an email and reported that the material that they received from that students is all copied and pasted from sources, and they showed me the sources and the communication and everything. So they had proof. So I sent that all to the college.
Okay. Was that student removed from the group? The student that was plagiarized?
Yes.
So the student was removed from the group.
Yes.
Okay. And thanks for sharing that out. I think as administrators and we manage courses and the students, we really do appreciate when you share that type of information with us, because we do take academic integrity very seriously, and we want to ensure that we're providing students with a fair and equitable and high standard of learning. And part of that includes keeping an eye out for academic integrity and alerting the college administrative departments when that happens so that we can track it. We do sometimes see repeat offenders, and doing it once is not right, but doing it the second, third, or fourth time is really not right, and it's good for you to share that with everyone. And I'm glad, both Laurie and Babak mentioned that the group noted it before the grades, before it was being graded. And I think that's really key. So I do believe that as part of the instructions or part of the rubric, students should be encouraged to do a review of each other's work and make sure that there's no plagiarized work. And I know that sometimes it's difficult because they may not know, especially if they're grabbing it from a resource that's not online. But in general, you can copy and paste a line from a document and stick it into Google. And if it's been copied and pasted, if it's copy and pasted from Wikipedia into a document, when you copy paste it back into Google, Google takes you back to Wikipedia. So it's the cycle. And so there are ways for students to double check one another, to be alert to the fact that plagiarism is not acceptable. So we've got a message here. Issue's not plagiarism, but when one has poor academic English. All right. That's a very interesting issue. So we've got an issue where the quality is of a concern because there's plagiarism. So just to tie off on that, I do believe that we need to give stringent repercussions to the student that's plagiarized. But it's important to have students check each other beforehand and to confirm that when they submit it, there is no plagiarized content, so that as a group, they're acknowledging that due diligence has been made. I don't know of any situation where that's been done where plagiarism's happened afterwards. And I know that there could be varying ideas about what the penalty could or should be. So I don't know if anyone has any ideas about if it's not caught beforehand, does this ever happen to you? And then Laura, I don't know if this is a situation you had, but a situation where it actually went all the way through to the facilitator marking point when it was identified as plagiarized. Tricia, do you still have your hand up from before?
I do, because I have a scenario where the students are given case studies and they're from real life situations. And they go into a company background and they obviously copy it off a website, and you can tell. And how can you really tell? It's because when they start to write, the grammar is completely different. But in business, we often do our presentations that way, where we copy things from Google and put them into documents, and then we massage and we make our recommendations. And so I've tended to go back to people and say, look, I can tell the difference between your writing and what you've copied. So you know what? Use Grammarly and start improving your writing skills by looking at the way that things are written. And this is commonly done in business. So I'm not going to fault you on that, because why should you rewrite a whole paragraph on the definition of what Nestle does in their business? But I want you to understand that if I can see that there's such a significant difference in the content and the way you're writing, so will your peers in business. So you're going to have to learn how to do this in a business scenario, and you will copy and paste. It happens all the time in industry, and we don't always do footnotes and all sorts of things and say where we got our pictures from when we do a PowerPoint for a sales meeting or a marketing meeting. But do know that your writing style doesn't match, and you're going to have to decide, where you want to clean things up. So I think that that's also part of the lesson in plagiarizing, is that depends on the context and where it's done, but it is done in business all the time. So you need to look at the content of what you're copying and make sure that you've got your own writing skills up to grade.
Yeah, I do believe, I get that there's copying. I know from a fine arts background, we artists copy all the time, but there is definitely still space to acknowledge. And I always think of plagiarism in some sense as stealing. So it's one thing to use someone else's work as a because you think it's good and you want to acknowledge it, but it's another thing to take it and pretend it's your own. And I think that's kind of what you're saying about it's your own voice, your own writing. So we do need to be diligent with students that it's about your own writing skills, but it's also about, if you did take it from somewhere else, you do need to cite it. That way you're acknowledging the intellectual contributions of others. And I do know that we're running out of time, everyone. So what I wanted to do, and we could talk about this, I'll definitely run another session on group work. What we were going to do, what to do when it goes wrong. We've run out of time for that, but I think we've kind of covered some of the main topics already. What I did want to share with you is there is a collection of resources on the Google Drive. I'm going to send these slides to you so you'll have this link. There's examples of group contracts. There's examples of milestone. There's peer grading. I think there's about 20 different documents. Some I've created, some I've scrounged from others that have been willing to share. So that is a space that I'd like you to visit once you get these slides, as well as please add, you've got edit access to this folder through this link. Please add anything that you've used that you think would be helpful to your peers, because the more examples we have, the more that we can adapt and use resources in a variety of contexts well, and we can do a good job of it. So it's 8 o'clock on the dot. I'm going to stay for a few minutes if anyone wants to ask any questions. I really appreciate your contributions. Everyone shared so much valuable information. Look out for these slides in the next few days with notes, as well as I will be sending you the digital pin that you can add to your LinkedIn to show that you've participated. So thank you, everyone. I'm sorry that time snuck up so quickly on us, and look out for this topic again in the future, and we can continue on our conversations.